We are live, man.
We are live.
It's Wednesday at 7:00.
Wednesday, suckers.
Exactly. It's just like the old radio shows. You used to wait by the radio, right?
Right.
Before our time, right? So we were like waiting. Yeah, we were waiting by the TV, waiting for the Dukes of Hazzard to show up.
Dukes of Hazzard.
Yeah.
And you know what was right after Dukes of Hazzard? Dallas.
Oh, yeah. My parents watched that. I hated that show. And it was my name.
Yeah. God, I couldn't stand it. Because I remember the Dukes would play. And then right after that, it was like Dallas. And it was like, and you're like, no, and they're like, okay, go to bed, kids. And we're just like, no.
Yeah. It was back in the days when TV wasn't trying to program you. It was trying to just give you something fun to watch.
It was entertainment. It was just straight entertainment. So
yeah. Well, let's run down the list real quick. We got Uncle Squirrel in here. He's still blaming squirrels. Olive's here. Art Jones, Olive, Terrence Seymour, Fab Race Mod Repeat, which is Chris Cox out of Northeast Dragway. Mitten Made Muscle, and I think that's it that's in here right now.
Awesome. If you see a James Stoy come in and say hi, I have a question for him, and I have a John Mounts. If I don't see them, I will answer their questions via email. So,
well, the first question I got is this. All right. Art Jones says, Dallas, I watched your video of you getting those Rover aluminum heads. Can they be used on a 73 350 Buick? No, they cannot. You could technically use them on a 340 and then make a 340 into a 350, but there's no real gain from those cylinder heads, especially on something that large a cubic inch. I was actually looking at them as a replacement for 64 300 heads because they're getting so hard to come by. Most of them are corroded to death because they're a factory aluminum head that's been around 60 years, right?
Yeah.
And they weren't in race applications. They were used on daily drivers. So antifreeze did a pretty good number on most of the water jackets in there, and they're in pretty rough shape these days if you find a set. And this was just a cheap go-between. I did notice today that the casting is actually a little bit different. So I'll probably address that on a video coming up here soon on how to either cheaply repair or repair. Well, not necessarily repair. It's nothing broken. It just doesn't fit the block. It actually, they fit on there. You can bolt them on. The China rail is at a different angle apparently, and I think they did that because they added bolt holes to the front of the head so they could have bosses to hold brackets. Was it really? But yeah. But upcoming video, I'll show you how to cheaply do that. I'm just going to use some epoxy and because it's literally just holding oil in the motor, right? So it's not part of the head surface, so it's nothing critical.
Yeah,
that hold oil in.
But just keeping it so that way it just keeps the pressure inside the block too.
Yeah,
so nothing.
Real simple. All right, so let's see. Olive's asking about the Rover Buick too. Wasn't the Rover Buick engine one of those little ones? Yes, it was, and it's the same engine that I went and grabbed those heads off of. It's just 35 years later, right? So they've had small updates and differences. The valves are smaller, the ports are smaller, but they're aluminum, right? So and they're $145 for a set. And so when you look at it, you buy a couple of rotary bits and chew them up, and if you screw them up, go get another set, right?
That's right. Great practice.
Nobody's beating down the door to take all them Rover heads off, and especially after they spend 4 hours just removing the upper intake manifold and the valve covers.
Right.
So, let's see. Olive says, "Hey Dallas, keep missing the show because YouTube." Well, welcome to the show. This is
welcome.
Tonight.
Awesome.
And Shane's here to answer as many questions as you could throw at him. All right.
I'll try. I'll do my best.
Let's see. Abel D saying, will you be adding EFI on your Buick engine? If so, will you run a Rover harness at ECU? Okay, so I am not adding EFI to this 300. This was just an experiment, I guess, to determine if I could use the later Rover heads. They have a smaller chamber. Okay, so I guess to rewind things a little bit, the most coveted small block in 64.5 was what they call the Wildcat 355. It was a 300 cubic inch Buick. In 64, it came with aluminum heads and aluminum 4-barrel intake manifold, but it had small ports, small runners, small valves, that were essentially just 215 takeoff pieces. In 65, they went to a cast iron head. Now those the engines in 64 had 11-to-1 compression, and they did it with a smaller chamber on the head, as well as a slightly dished piston. Now in 65, they went to a little bit larger chamber, but they went to a flat top piston. And those pistons are so coveted, you cannot find them. And you virtually got to go out and spend $1,000 on a custom set of pistons to have something made that works. But this whole idea was these Rover heads have such a small chamber that you can literally leave the 9-to-1 compression pistons in there with the big dish in them. Okay. And you can throw these 27cc chamber heads from the Rover on there, and it went from 54 to 27cc. And your compression ratio goes from 9 to 11-to-1.
Wow.
And when you have a dish piston and you have that kind of compression, that dish piston is essentially the most efficient piston based on flame front, right? Because it allows it to expand in 360 degrees from the center of explosion. And the piston being dished, it follows that explosive I guess ball, right?
That's why diesels are curved.
Oh, really?
Yeah, diesels they have a flame deck, so that's the reason why they inject. They have a diesel as a flat, and the actual dome is in the piston. So that way, when it injects it directly into the dome, the scoop or whatever. I'm gonna call it the dome, but the reverse dome of the piston. So yes.
Huh. I did not know that, but I think. A dish piston is the most efficient, to be honest with you. It's just hard to get compression with a dish piston. And in this case, it's actually kind of easy because this engine family that a lot of people aren't familiar with, that small block, the 300 215 variant from even you throw the Rover in the mix, there's 5 different sets of cylinder heads available for just that one factory engine. And they're all different when it comes to port size, runner size, valve size, and then chamber size. And mixing and matching them to come up with that 11-to-1 compression ratio without spending $1,000 on a set of pistons is a very cheap alternative to making a Wildcat 355. And that's what I was going for.
Right.
It will take some effort on my part because I'm going to have to open up the ports, and I'm not Mr. Head Porter. This will be my first set I ever ported, right? And it probably will be terrible, and I might end up getting into water jackets. But there's 3 more sets at the junkyard, so I don't think I'm gonna have a problem getting another set and fixing said head. But it is going to take a little bit of work on my part. But I'm hoping to come up with Wildcat 355 numbers, and since all those engines were rated on torque, the Wildcat 355, honestly. I think it would have made 290, 300 horsepower if they even checked. I don't know if they checked, this was just a cheap alternative to it. So instead of throwing pistons at it and a lot of money. Okay. And then the EFI thing, I would never in my life use a Rover ECU or wiring harness. They're made by Lucas Electronics, and it's like one step away from I would have to say like a candle wick with wax on it.
Right. You tune them with a typewriter,
But in reality, the smart thing to do in this case probably would be if I was to grab that lower intake manifold and even the upper, would probably just be using the fuel rail and the intake manifold. And then from there, you plug in like a Holley HP on it, and then use a distributor for a Buick that's meant for like the Holley HP. They have a Hyperspark that's actually supposed to work with their EFI.
Yeah.
So that's what I would do. Okay, Mitten Made Muscle says Holley Terminator EFI makes it not worth it to use factory EFI anymore. Okay,
right, there you go.
Even the new Terminator 4150 and 4500 carb lookalikes are taking off. Yeah, and to tell you the truth, that's not the sniper stuff, right? That's the Terminator 4150.
Well, I think it's the sniper. I think the sniper one that's the carburetor looking one, I believe.
Right.
I'm not familiar with a lot of Holley stuff.
Not me neither. And I did Holley EFI on my T-Bird race car, and that was the first time I'd ever used it. That's the first time I'd ever seen anyone use it, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
It was just that new when I put it on there. It's okay. I really, I guess I'm probably too boomerish to, if that's a term, I'm too boomerish to use the EFI effectively and efficiently. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of changes that can be made on the fly. The one that I found of value was I had two different tunes. So I'd run on regular 100 octane pump gas because, like Shane and I were talking in the first video, you could go get 100 octane pump gas in San Diego.
Yes.
You go to the VP station down by the beach in what is that, PB, and you'd freaking get 100 octane from the VP station. Or if I wanted to, I could throw some oxygenated fuel in there, some MS 109, and I literally like hook up the laptop, click the second tune, and I don't have to change crap. I mean, it's literally 5 minutes and the thing's ready to go on oxygenated fuel, which needs about 10% more fuel.
Yeah.
Right.
It'll run lean if not. Yeah.
Right. And it was amazing. And there would be a little bit of horse. Actually, I tested that when I did that. It was 33 horsepower difference.
Really?
From oxygenated fuel to regular 100 octane.
Yeah. I've seen right around 30 to 40 horse. So yeah, that's good that you got it. Normally you see that on something that's like in the 700 to 800 horsepower range. So that's about right.
Well, I was kind of impressed that it actually made a difference. That was oxygenated fuel was fairly recent at that time.
Yeah, it was still new. It was hard to test it. It was like, where do you go and test it? Who's got a dyno? Who can afford that?
I was out there in San Diego and I went to West Tech. And when I came in there with the car, they're like, oh, we're just going to tune this drag car, blah, blah, blah. And then I broke out to 2 different cans of fuel. And then next thing you know, Brule just appears out of nowhere. Right. I'm Steve Brule. I'm going to help you check your fuel. Right. And then he's in there. He's doing 2 different tunes for the Holley HP one on oxygen, one on 100 octane. And it literally was like 33 horsepower difference on, and that motor was 650 horse. That's probably about right.
Yeah, it's about 650.
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
We also played with the timing, and because those Cleveland heads that I had on there, the AFD SP4 VSs or VRs, either one, whatever one it is, it's performance head from AFD before they became a Chinese lump of crap. But I was told never go over 29 degrees of timing, and that thing, we went to 30 and it dropped off like 18 horsepower. Went to 31, was 45 horse.
Wow.
And it was that big of a difference. I was surprised.
Wow. That is surprising.
Yeah. But talks about the efficiency of the cylinder head.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, Art Jones, that's why I was asking about them making higher compression. They will make higher compression, and on a Buick 350, okay, that motor has so much stroke. If you were to put them heads on there and it was let's say it was an 8-to-1 motor, you'd probably end up with like something. They normally have 59 cc chambers. So you would probably end up with something probably closer to like 13-to-1, which would be unstreetable.
I was going to say it's probably 13-to-1.
Yeah.
That's funny.
All right, so mid muscle, it's saying Holley came out with the new Terminator 4150 and 4500 flange, and now the ECU is separate, no longer mounted on the throttle body. Oh, so that's a deviation from the sniper.
Oh, okay.
That I was all about doing that sniper thing because they actually had one that was like a quadrijet bolt on. See that one, Shane? That it was a quadrijet or a thermoquad replacement.
Yeah, it looks just like it. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm like, wow, I'm going to put that on my Suburban and see what kind of mileage I can get out of it. And so I typed it in one day, and the first thing it came up with a Facebook page, and it's like, I think it was like Holley Sniper sucks or something like that. I'm like, oh shit, let me go look at that. Right. So
yeah,
I looked at that, and there was probably 200 people on that page that was members at the time. And I bet there was 50 posts about how there was injector failures and what was the other one? RFI issues. And
wow.
It was radioactive, or not radioactive, radio interference.
Yes, radio.
Right? Yeah. And it was causing the computer to just go nutsoid, and guys couldn't figure it out. And I'm like, ooh, wow, I'll let that one marinate for a while before I put money into it, right? But all right. So Abel D says, Dallas, send me your engine that you build, and I'll dyno test it on the trail my 73 Land Rover for free.
Sure, no problem.
Hey, yeah, come and pick it up. Well, if you want to pick up the mule, you can try out the mule. It's just a stock 67 300 Buick. So that one's probably not going to be up your alley, but I bet I get the aluminum head motor together and with that more compression, I think I'm going to stab a cam in that one and see if we can crest 1 horsepower per cube is kind of my number here. I actually want to figure out a 409, like a 409 Chevrolet would have been available at the same time, right? 64.
Mm-hmm.
64 the first year of the big block, or is that still last year of the 409?
I'm going to Google it real quick because I used to know this one.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I was asking is that was the only engine I know of from General Motors that was literally 1 horsepower per cube. I think it was actually 425 horse on a 409, right? So, well, it'd been a little bit more than 1 horsepower per cube. But if I do a camshaft, like similar to that, I'm not going to go with big solid lifter or nothing like that, but just a cam, probably something mid-range, like let's say 484 lift, and then I don't know, like a 112 or 110 LSA, something that would be some similar to factory, but it'd just be a spicy camshaft, a Duntov 3030, right?
Get something that talks to you. So I Googled it, and 61 to 65. It was on the option sheet in 65. 64 was the last year they're actually putting them in cars. At least that's what Google's is saying. 65, it was still on the option list for what was left over, I guess.
Well, I figured this is a good target then. At 64, you would have had a 409 Chevrolet. You would have, what did the 327, 375 horse been around, or is that? I don't think so.
No.
I think it was the 350 horse motor in the vet with the fuel injection.
That's right, yeah.
So I think that's probably a good number. If I shoot for like 1.2 horsepower per cube,
perfect.
If it's doable on just stock parts minus a camshaft, then it would have been. I think it would just kind of show its worth.
Yeah,
really, what I'm shooting for there. All right, Mopars, Mustangs, and minivans made it in. Hello, everyone. Is this Colleen Tebow's son? I think so. Welcome to the show. All right, so we got Olive says, well, I know for radio interference, it's usually best to have resistor wires and conductor plugs, or the other way around, but not both the same. To tell you the truth, for those guys that were experiencing the RFI, what they were having problems with, it wasn't really the plugs and the wires. You're always going to have that RFI noise, right? But what you do is you shield the wires for the wiring harness.
Yep.
And since the computer is actually mounted on the actual throttle body, it made it really hard to shield anything.
Yeah, because it's reading it, everything.
Right. And that was the big thing. And I think that and the injectors and fuel pressure regulators were a big problem for those things.
Also, too, you're going to have the alternator there that's going to be, conducting magnetic. The back of them gets, charged magnetically. You're going to have a lot of, radio interference with the magnetic too.
Oh, from the pickup on the distributor?
From the alternator itself.
Oh, from the alternator. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, because you remember, what was it? In the 80s, that's when the stereo thing started coming in for, like our generation was the 80s, right? So everybody had this bumping stereo, but back then cars were, you had a 130 amp alternator, and it was not clean, and it was carbureted, so you had electronic ignition, and you'd literally hear it through the stereo as they're driving.
Right. Yep, that's true.
So Abel D says, Dallas ever thought of just getting a junkyard Land Rover, stripping the fenders and using it as a dyno test mule? Such a chassis would make it easy to change engines and dyno them. So I don't have a running list of dyno stuff. I am not Richard Holdner on this one.
Right.
My super stock Buick. Okay, so the only reason I'm taking the mule to the dyno was the super stock Buick 350 that I did was the first engine I wanted to dyno. And when I called the dyno, the guy said, hey, if you got a buddy that's needing to bring another Buick motor, it would cost literally nothing because you're going to pay for the day anyway.
Yeah.
Right? And you're going to use all the same stuff. So bring it up and you guys could split it. Well, I called all my buddies, and of course, nobody had anything ready to go. And so I'm like, well, crap, I need to throw another motor together, and then maybe I can just double down on what I have, right? Because I'm paying the money anyway. Get 2 motors. So that's what I did, was I put that mule together specifically for that, to establish a baseline, so that when we swap 350 Buick heads on there, that's my main goal. That's my ultimate goal on this one.
Yeah.
The 350 Buick heads on that 300, and see if there's any real difference. I'm going to extended lengths, and Shane knows how far I'm going. I take the stock 68 2-barrel camshaft and turn down the cam journals on this thing, so that it has virtually the same profile, just the correct firing of the correct valve arrangement. Right?
It's going to be good. This is going to be good.
I think it would be.
Yeah, it's going to be good. That's a bunch of people
checking in.
Yeah, they're all checking in. You know, what's been going on with me this last weekend, I was going to upgrade my lights to, like, you know, an LED or just an H13, right?
Oh, I saw that. Yeah. On your Lizard King, right?
Yeah. Because, you know, the H6024, the problem is that when I was in Tucson, I blew a bulb just from the bouncing down the freeway. And I went to the auto parts store, and none of them had a 6024 in stock. None of them. They can get it in a couple days, but they just couldn't get it to me. I had to order ahead at an O'Reilly's in Texas. Then when I was driving, I had to stop and get it. And then I blew another bulb, and I had to stop and get, and then I just drove it with high beams the rest of the way, because I knew I was going to be driving at night anyway. So,
right.
But this one here, we're going to be going on this trip, and I don't want to change bulbs on the side of the road. So I went with, a 2008 to 2011 Jeep. You know, Jeeps, they can't have anything stock. We all know that. They got to put the angry face, and they got to be able to see the vehicles from the space shuttle. You know, they got to have every single okay. You know, remember the old Lund kits, you know, for the Chevy trucks?
Yeah.
Yeah. They basically say okay for the Jeep Cherokees, right? So they take off the stock ones because they're not good enough anymore. But you can buy them for $20, and they fit right in your factory bulb location for like an older 7-inch style 6024 bulb. So remember that. And it takes an H13 9008 type of a bulb. So I got it, and I put it on, and it was a magical difference between like the 6024 and the H13.
Oh, I'm sure it was freaking night and day.
It was night. And then I put that LED in it, and it was like absolute daylight. Like, it was just, I couldn't believe it. And then I measured the amps of like what it took to run the 6024. It was almost 7 amps to run both lamps. The other ones only take an amp and a half for total for both lights, an amp and a half to run both LEDs. Wow. Yeah. So that's a no-brainer right there.
Oh, for sure.
And then I got a whole bunch of questions like, why'd you go with the Sylvanias? And why'd you go, get this like Midimoto, 2-stroke or this VR7, whatever, these all Amazon LEDs. I got it because I can go to any O'Reilly's and get another one. Yeah. And it's got a 5-year warranty on it with a receipt. So I can't beat that. And it's got a little electric fan to cool them down and everything right on it. Plus it's got a driver in it. Can't beat it.
Well, so. the big thing, the sad part is, like, I remember in the 90s when you go into a parts store, they used to have a dedicated like rack that was nothing but headlamps, right? Because they were so freaking big, and they were glass, and you're buying a box with glass in it, right? And I haven't thought of that. You don't go to the parts store and see that anymore.
No, they were, for the longest time, they were on the very bottom shelf. Like, everything else was hanging on like the little blister packs. They were on the bottom shelf, and then I went in there, and I was just like, oh, they must have them behind the counter. So I go up, and it was like an AutoZone. They didn't have, this is in Tucson. Then we went to O'Reilly's, didn't have that. And then there was like another one, like it's a Checkers or something, and they didn't have it. And I was just, oh my God, this is like the most common bulb on planet Earth. But at one time it was, so
yeah.
And H13 is never
1975.
Exactly.
So. All right. Well, all I'm saying here, I wonder if anyone knows a decent maker of LED headlights for old school single 4x6 sealed beam. Really must get rid of my S10's crappy HIDs.
Yeah, right. I was thinking about going to HIDs, but I just like the LEDs because it was literally a plug and play type of deal. So I really don't know on that question. That's something that I would just Google it. I mean, I don't know.
The 4x6, I think that's what's in my Suburban. Is that right?
Yeah. It's the Chevrolet style. It's the small ones. Yeah.
And Okay, there used to be Hella used to make a replacement light that was actually a glass bulb that you could put a later model halogen, like let's say
Oh yeah,
late
yeah.
90s style in it, right? And then you
Hmm.
just replace that element whenever it goes bad.
Hmm.
But now they no longer make those. There is a couple of companies on the Suburban page where guys were buying stuff from Amazon, and they're like, "Man, it looks so great," and it'd be like 1 week and it wouldn't work anymore, right?
That's right.
So,
And that's why with the factory headlight lens,
exactly OEM stuff, right?
yeah, exactly, because it has that distinguished cutoff, so there's no light being blasted up in the sky. I'm not trying to hunt squirrels, and I'm not killing the person driving oncoming. It's a focused light, and it's just massive amounts of light.
Yeah. Well, I need to, I really need to do that because if
Yeah,
if it is literally like that big of a difference,
it is.
man, I mean, I love my old Burb, but dude, I do like seeing. That is a big plus.
And you got to fight back a little bit now, because even in my truck, I'm really high up in my truck. In your Suburban, you're high up, but if you get into a car, I mean, there's lights that are so bright you can't even look at the line and see it anymore, like
Oh, I
before.
know.
Yeah,
And I'm like, you got to wear sunglasses at night just so you don't crash into somebody.
you get that like burned light
I've
in
been
your
wondering
eyes.
there used to be like a limitation on how many lumens the light could make. And I
Yeah,
wonder if it's just been kicked to the curb now, like no one cares to enforce it.
I don't think
Because,
so. I think because the light's been focused. Before, it was because the light was so shot out like a shotgun.
uh-huh.
They did that, but now that the light has been focused, as long as they're set correctly, it really is no light being set up. But it's for like lifted trucks or whatnot, or people who replace them. They don't take the time to realign their headlights, so they're kind of just pointing wherever they
Right. They're
want.
laser beams.
Exactly, and they
Yeah.
are. They're in fact, this one I'm looking at, it's such a focused light. It's ridiculous. Like, I was like, wow, that's incredibly bright.
All right. So Olive saying non-blue HIDs would be okay, not looking to be obnoxious. Again, you're probably gonna have to do some research on yours, and I'm sure Shane, and that's a big thing. If you're a car, like a Gearhead today, right?
Mhm.
A lot of it is research.
Yeah,
You figure out what's going to work with what doesn't. And I'm like Shane. I like staying with OEM stuff, so I could literally stop at a parts store,
exactly.
pick things up. Right. That's why I've never used like the early Rover stuff on anything that I drive, because it takes them 13/16 plugs, right? And you can't go to the parts store and get those like off the shelf anymore.
No,
So
it's funny you say that, because that's exactly why I did it. Because we drive our vehicles. Like, I'm going to be driving to drag week with my car, and I'll do 1,300 miles in the car, and you have to be able to pull over and get a part.
yeah. All right. Well, it looks like Dizzy is in the house.
Easy,
You need to get to work on some subs, buddy. Not going to find them here. We only got 33 watching. You probably already got all of them.
Right? How many's he got? How many subs does he have?
I don't know. I think the last report I got from John was like, I think, let me see here. I do have an email from John. So let's see. Dizzy, where are you at, buddy? He's at 288.
Oh, 288.
Wow. He's hustling. Just needs to hustle more. Alrighty. Oh, Jason's garage is in the house. What's up, Jason? Let's see. Mopar's Mustang note to self: keep extra headlight bulbs in the trunk.
I did that.
Idea.
I actually, what? That's why I bought two, is because in case that happened again on my way back. I just never even thought it was going to be an issue before I went to Tucson. I just had no clue. So yes, I did keep extra bulbs. I had a little plastic crate with extra coolant, extra oil, and extra so on and so parts. But now I'm not going to ever worry about it again. I'll keep it a couple H13s in it, but these things, they're going to be fine.
Oh, Dizzy's saying he's got 290, so he's about to crest to the 300 mark.
Ooh,
man, you're getting down to the wire, but it looks like you're going to probably make it, man.
Yeah.
Art Jones, I'll have to do that to my Apollo. Yeah, your Apollo probably uses the same light that Shane's talking about.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's a single light like a Nova.
Oh, okay. Yeah, perfect. So then that is, just go and get a Jeep Wrangler 2008. I think it's a 2011. You can go to eBay and they're $20, $20 for both lights. and they're in pristine condition.
Sweet. Well, Abel D is saying in Dallas, are there any good trails in Tennessee near you for off-roading?
Yes.
Man, I know where Shane lives at. There's some up north in, what is that, Tipton County?
Yeah.
There's quite a few of them up in Tipton County. And then near me, I live near the Cedars of Lebanon. So I don't know if you can go off-roading there. I don't do off-roading stuff. I already have enough, I don't know, bad hobbies that hog up all my money. And
right.
off-roading seems like it'd be one that could suck up a lot of money pretty quick.
Yeah.
So I'm not a off-road guy. I wouldn't know where the trails are at. But I'm assuming there is. I always see these UTVs on trailers coming around this place. So there's probably some kind of off-road place around here.
Yeah. And you know, one thing about this place too is that everything's going to be like really muddy and rocky, where, you know, back in San Diego, it was a lot of desert. So you could have something that was, you know, kind of just regular and still have fun. Here, it's got to be expensive.
Okay. I don't know what Olive's talking about there, but anybody got any more questions? Throw some questions out there. If not, no big deal. Shane and I can ramble on for hours about interesting or not interesting stuff.
Yeah. And then also too, there was one little problem I had, and I put a video out that I probably shouldn't have, but it was like, I used these little adapter plugs and I got them from Door.
I saw that, dude.
Man, was I pissed. I was done. I had worked all day Saturday. I got the lights, and you know, and you're making your schematic and you solder it all in and everything. And then on Sunday, I was going to jack it up, and I was like, you know what? I'll tape this up. So I'm taping it up, and it broke. It was just the most amazing thing. I was like, are you kidding me? I go to the other one, because I bought three, and then the other one broke. And I'm just like, I'm unplugging it for the first time, and it broke. I literally dropped it, left, went to another parts store, grabbed more, came back, and just started. I was so
hacking them out.
So mad.
Yeah. Well, I saw you the dormant plug, and then the baby like F you. Right? So
if I put that baby in there, that means I'm upset.
It was in there like 9 times, so you must have been really upset.
I was very upset. Yes.
So,
and that's why, and that video was only 2 minutes long, and that still took me all day Sunday to do, because I had to recut it. I solder everything, and I just didn't want to put any more video in that. I just was like, look, this is what it was. I'm out of here. I'm done.
Yeah. Well, and that's an awesome workaround. I mean, I have never even considered using factory stuff for an upgraded model, but I mean, that's exactly what I would do. Because that's just who I am. I want to be able to get parts anywhere.
Yeah. And what's nice about those Sylvania bulbs is that the wire where it comes down at in the back, it actually is physically smaller in depth. So like if you have like an older vehicle where the part of the fender has, you know, only so much distance, so it's hard to get a plug on the back, it literally, you set it up so the wire goes straight down. That's how you align the LED bulb in there, because it's got to go 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock, right? So you line it up so the light goes down. It is literally about 750 thousandths shorter. So it makes the clearance even easier. So it's a great thing.
Well, your wife is chiming in here. She's saying, Shane, remember I had those fuses in the Ram Charger. Thankfully, I had those wires hanging, and I changed it late at night in the restaurant parking lot. Cops couldn't get
me that night. That's right. Right. Yeah, it was fuses and a bunch of other stuff, and we had to make it work, let's put it that way. And it was one of those nights, let's say, that we were probably, I don't want to say too much on the radio, but it was one of those times where we shouldn't have been driving, and we were, and we made it home, and we fixed lights with wires that were hanging down. So yes, it was.
Well, you know, the interesting thing, she says, the Ram Charger there, I was telling John Wilburn, there's a rot lot next to me, or like near me, and this guy, he pulls cars for a living. Well, he's got one in there now. It's like a 91 Ram Charger, and I'm like, man, that had to be like one of the last years they made it, right? It looks like the first year Cummins trucks, so that would have been
80s. It was 80s, yeah.
And
they made them in 90s, but they were like only the 2-wheel drive ones.
Well, it's a 2-wheel drive one.
Oh, okay. So yeah, it was in the 90s. Yeah,
but it's got the Vector wheels on it, right? So it's like those were factory on some of the Chryslers, and up through like say 89, 90. So it's one of those years, but it's a 2-wheel drive Ram Charger. And I mean, they're asking, I think, $6,000 for the thing, but
Yeah.
I'm sure when you go in there with some cash, you could have that. But man, is it clean.
Mm-hmm.
But
I'm looking at this this Trail Duster. It's a 75. Trail Dusters and a Ram Charger, same thing.
Right.
Oh yeah, it'd be nice to get another one. I had one, and it had a lockers front and rear, and a 31-inch tires in it. It had a 2-barrel 360 in it. It literally went anywhere you put it, any direction, it would just go. Never had to worry about it ever.
It's like literally a tank.
Yeah, absolutely, tank with 4 wheels. Absolutely.
Iceman 2K10 says, "Hey guys, Shane, can you talk about the new 2-piece lifters? It looks like a cartridge goes into the roller body from the bottom."
It actually goes from the top. This is the HLA lifter he's talking about. It's a cartridge style, so it's a new technology that they were working on before I came there. I was actually working on it at a different company with something totally different, but they perfected it at Comp. And it's an insert that you can put in there, and if you have any problems with it, you can either just change out the insert, and what's nice about it too is that it's fully tested before it goes in there, so none of the lifters collapse or anything. It's an amazing piece and how it's done. It's actually got
rollers.
What's that?
Is it just rollers right now?
Yes, it's just hydraulic rollers right now.
It would be really awesome if they did it with a hydraulic or with like even flat tap and stuff. And then if they failed, or you wanted to, like, oh, I need a new set of lifters, you just buy the exterior part and slide the cartridge in, right?
That's right. Yeah,
then,
that's actually what I was working on for the circle track guys, because if they ever have a problem with the lifter, instead of breaking in a camshaft, like say, because all those guys have to run a hydraulic lifter and they're running high RPM, so the lifter would collapse. So they would have to take the lifter out and then rebuild the lifter and then put that lifter back in there. Well, with this cartridge thing, you could just unclip it, slide it back in there, clip back in, and drop it right back into the same hole. Be a simple deal.
Right. With just a new lifter body on it then.
Exactly. No, you can run the same body. Usually it's a hydraulic lifter itself, the actual internals that collapse from the RPM.
I wonder if you can refinish lifters at home. Can you refinish with the lifters at home with like a 2000 grit sandpaper or something?
The problem is it's slightly concave. It's got a slight concave on them, just like the camshaft has a slight taper on it, like a 1.5 taper. Some of them have 2 thou, so that way they're always rotating, they're always spinning.
Right, so it's not in one spot.
You got it. So it would be very difficult to surface that correctly with the crown that you're looking for. Put it that way.
Well, go figure. So Clayton says, drag radials, I'm new to them. Any tips? Also, any tips for a new guy at the drag strip? I was street racing back in the day, but we'll be on the real quarter-mile strip in a couple weeks for the first time. Oh, how much experience you have with drag radial, Shane?
Quite a bit.
Okay, well, I'll let you start. I mean, I have some. I've only had one set.
Okay, but, yeah, they're going to be a stiff sidewall, so it's definitely going to hit harder. If you've used any stiff wall type of slicks, if so, these are going to react about the same, but with the radials, you're going to run a lot more air pressure, usually in the 18 pounds, sometimes 24, just really depends on track. And they're going to hit really hard. You're not going to get that, let's call it the massive wrinkle wall. So it's going to be a lot more shock to the system. So you gotta set up for that. And you're going to have to set up your suspension for that also. Usually with a soft sidewall or like a slick, you're going to hit it and then you can actually allow it to separate a little bit more. With these, it's going to hit it so hard. You got to control that separation.
Well, so what I've learned about drag radials is, like, with it having the stiffer sidewall, one, your 60 foots actually drop, right? Mm-hmm. If they hook well.
If they hook, that's correct.
Also, it's all about the contact patch. You're not going to get the expansion like you would with a drag slick, because that's how they work, right? That literally that soft sidewall allows it to plant the tire in like a triangulator shape, right? And it increases the contact patch. When you have that drag radial and it's stiff, it doesn't do that. So it's all about the compound that's on the tire.
That's correct.
That's why they say when you get them, don't do a big burnout on them, right? Because it doesn't need it. It's the soft compound. What you're going to have is a giant pile of rubber behind your car and tire that you got 3 passes on.
That's correct. Yeah, you don't need to do big burnout at all.
Well, the other thing I noticed was, like you said, with the higher tire pressures that's required for them, because you don't need the sidewalls to wrinkle. It's not intended for it to wrinkle. It actually has the wires, the radial portion of the tire has an angle in the wire that's in rotation of direction. That's why it's a directional required tire, right? Is those wires are laid over to when you put the force to them, it's actually forcing the tire to do something similar as a wrinkle wall slick, but it's not flexing. Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
And the big one is when you go on those higher tire pressures, your mile an hour is going to be probably 2 to 3 mile an hour faster.
That's
and
right.
What I found is you can get away. You want to run those things on a ragged edge. Okay. So get it kind of in the middle, which would be like Shane was saying, 15, 20, 25 pounds, right? Go out, make your pass. If it runs a clean pass, add more air pressure.
Exactly. Keep going up until your 60 foot goes down.
Right. And then what you'll find is you will have gained probably 8 miles an hour in the quarter mile.
Yeah.
And because the rolling resistance is so much less.
Exactly. On top end. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. So
and your converter will become more efficient too, because you won't be loading the converter as you're going down the track, because the rolling resistance is easier. So everything's going to work better.
Right. As well as you're not losing a bunch of horsepower through the sidewall.
Yeah, right. Well, it's expanding, right? Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, let's see what else we got here. Everybody's jumping in. They're getting all greeted. The Kickendales is here. Welcome, Kickendales. Let's see. Creekside Garage, setting fuel pressure for electric. Pump to carb. I'm setting at 6.5 to 7 at idle, or revving some, or does it make a difference?
I can help with this one really good. Here's what I've always done, and I've always told people, is that whenever you're dealing with the carburetor, run the biggest fuel seat that you can, as far as for your, get 130 thousandths one that's made for, like, say, alcohol. Yeah. I think they're 140 thousandths, and then drop the fuel pressure. And the reason being is because you want as much flow without the pressure. You want the volume. The whole idea about pressure, everyone thinks the pressure is good. The pressure is going to introduce air. And when air is coming shooting in there, it's going to go into the jets, and it's going to mess your fuel up, especially at high RPM. So what I tend to do is I tend to go with the biggest needle and seat that I can do, and I drop the fuel pressure. I'll get down to, say, 5 to 5.5, even in that. My race car that I raced you with, that's only at 4.5, but it's got 140 thousandths needle and seat. It's massive. It's for an alcohol, needle and seat. So I would try to get away with the lowest pressure you can, because that way you're not aerating the fuel pressure. Yeah.
What's happening is it cavitates that pump, which actually creates nitrogen bubbles in the fuel. And then when it goes to the carburetor, you're getting, like, let's say you're getting more fuel because it's at 6.5 pounds, right? Versus your factory 4 pounds. And you, with all things considered being the same, you'd be getting more fuel. But you're, just like you're saying, it's aerated with nitrogen bubbles. And it's going to take up some of that volume you're getting, right? And that's what I've always found too, is when you add pressure adds heat, right? And it also robs power, right? Because let's say you're doing this and you got a full-blown race car. It's just got let's say a Holley blue pump on it. You got the pressure at 7.5, 8 pounds, and your pump, you can hear it working. As soon as you turn it on, it's got that 2-second delay where it's got no fuel in it, no pressure, and all of a sudden it builds pressure, and you hear that pump draw down. All right. If you have a full-blown race car, you probably don't have an alternator. And if you do have an alternator, here's where you're losing power, because that pump is sucking it right off the alternator, causing that alternator to charge, and you're losing 10, 15 horsepower from that alternator just to turn that pump. When in reality, what would have been more efficient is if you just had a crank-driven pump. That's just one of those things. It's all about the balance.
Yeah, it is. But I would try to go as low as I could to answer your question, Creekside Garage. Go with as low as you can get away with. Higher is not always better in this application.
Let's say you have just a standard fuel system like everybody else has. 6.5 to 7 pounds is going to be plenty. Where you're going to want to test that is you can either go to the track or you can go out on the road in front of your house, whatever, someplace you got a good place you can do a high and pull, right? Because it's
Long.
got to get under heavy load in high gear.
Yep.
And if you need to bump it up, only bump it up a half a pound each time.
That's right.
Okay. And then you'll get to a point where it exceeds the capability of the needle and seat.
Yep.
And that's where you, okay, draw the line. I need to go back. I need to figure out either, like Shane was saying, put in a bigger needle and seat to get more volume and then decrease the pressure. But that's how you do it.
Yep.
But you're on the right track. Okay. Let's see here. Iceman 2K10. So I assume that should cure the bleed down problems some people are having. I don't know what he's talking about there. Maybe I'm too far behind.
Oh, let's see. He asked a question. Someone answered it above. Hello, Mustangs.
He's got another one here. What horsepower do you move up to a 3/8 fuel line? Over 400.
No, I would say I've ran a 5/16 all the way up to about 500. It really comes down to fuel. I was running a return style system. If it's running a return style system, you'll be fine. As long as it depends on what kind of power as long as it's not any type of boosted or nitrous power, a 5/16 will be fine.
I think a lot of that has to do with motor size and weight, to be honest with you.
Yeah. There's a lot of load, as far as how much delivery it needs. But
if you've got a healthy big block on feeding it, and then the car weighs 4,000 pounds plus,
3/8.
You probably need a 3/8 line.
Yeah.
But as horsepower numbers that we're looking for, there's not necessarily a horsepower number. It's really just how much fuel would the engine consume. The heavier it is, the more. Let's say it's got a 273 rear end gear in it, and it's only 3,800 pounds. You're probably going to want to run a 3/8 fuel line.
Yeah,
it's going to be really humping
loaded.
hard.
That's right.
Yeah, with that tall gear. All right. Oh, surely would have the GoPro effect of cutting wind too with the dimples. And I think he's talking to the wife there.
Sure.
All right.
She was there. I guess they've been talking in the comments about her Ram Charger.
Oh,
yeah. It was desert durable. We used to take that thing out and just thrash it. It was awesome.
It just
went anywhere. Oh yeah. There was times where we just drove through things for fun. It was great.
Mopar Al is in the house. What's up, Mopar Al? Thanks for coming by.
What's up, Al?
Yeah, my white Ford that I use for all the AHRA events.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I have worked on that more this year than probably anything else I own combined. Right?
Wow.
Like that includes all the other engines and everything. I was working on it all day today. And it was the fuel system was all gooned up, and I kept screwing with the mass air meter. I changed injectors. I was like, what in the world is going on? And you know what it was? It wasn't throwing any codes, but when you jump in to drive it, it would throw codes and start bucking and making all kinds of weird stuff. And I pull codes on it, there would be no codes. And I thought, I wonder if the fuel pressure is dropping off. I wonder if this is that, like regular fuel stuff. It just felt like a fuel issue.
Mm-hmm.
The TPS had worn out, and it's the second one in 2 years that it's worn the teeth out on the TPS on the inside to where the little spindle can't catch the TPS, and it catches it, turns a little bit, and then flops off.
Oh, so the map sensor is not reading the correct amount of map. It's like, well, this is not correct for the amount of throttle you're at. So yeah,
right. Well, and it's got a mass air meter, but it's still doing the same thing. Your mass air meter correlated to your TPS, your throttle angle, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's like, hold on, something's not right. But it's only when you drive it. So I pull codes on it, and it's like it's sitting there. You're not messing with the TPS. Mm-hmm. Right. And it didn't make any sense. I'm like, man, I'm not getting any codes. I don't know what the hell's wrong with this thing. And finally, I got it to get the check engine light stayed on. And I idled it back to my house at like a mile an hour. Right. Pulled it in the driveway, just knocked it in neutral with the check engine light on, and got the code reader out and read the damn thing. And it was like 63 TPS. Like, gosh, you got to get the second one this year.
That's an OBD1 too, right?
Yeah. And if you screw up TPS, it's like crash and burn. Just like if you unplug the mass air meter, it doesn't know what to do. It absolutely freaks out.
I'm lost.
I know. And I can see why, because there's very minimal sensors on them compared to
right.
Right? Right. All right. So John Wilburn is in the house. Hey, Mr. John Wilburn. Don English is here. Roger Bagwell is here. Man, everybody's jumping in now.
Awesome.
Don English says his Valiant is turned into the Flintstone mobile, and he was talking about floor pans last week. So I'm assuming he must be doing some floor pans in it.
Oh, nice. That must mean he got the plasma cutter out.
Iceman 2K10 says I have a low compression 440 509 cam headers, 3-inch exhaust, 355 sure grip, 1971 Charger. Still using the 5/16 factory fuel line until it gets to the engine compartment, then up to 3/8 for the Holley.
Won't make any difference. It won't for that setup.
5/16 worth.
Yeah, it's going to be just fine because that cam is only going to allow so much air, and I'm assuming you have either 452 heads or 906 heads. So for what you're doing, that's going to be just fine. You know, you're not going to RPM that thing more than say 6,000. You know, with that setup.
Yeah, Bear Rose Garage says best thing about OBD1 is they're easy to stick a carb on and toss that ECU.
Right.
You know, you're like the 47,000th person that's told me that. Tony was just like, I would work on it all the time. He's like, I don't understand why you haven't smashed it with a hammer and then just put a freaking quadrajet on the thing, right?
Yeah.
Man, I'd love to, but when the EFI works good, it works. And I mean, I got a white. I mean, if you've ever seen my white F250. I can knock down 20 plus in that thing, and it's got a 393 Windsor. And just with a Q-Jet, maybe 18, 19. I'm leaving a couple on the table, but man, I don't think it's going to do any better than that.
Yeah. You know that go down to the very last one, Mopar Al. He said that he's going to he says he's going to be trying that converter this weekend. That's the one that I got for the slag hammer. As long as you get some sort of tire on there, it's going to be correct because you got to load that thing correctly. You'll see the field of stall when you put it in reverse, because the multiplication of that reverse, you'll actually feel how much stall is in there if you put it in reverse and try to back up, because first gear is going to be a 245 in that. And on that transmission, but you got to have some sort of traction. Now, it's not, no converters is going to 100% freewheel to 4,000 RPM, but you got to bring it up just a little bit, just so that we start to load the actual pinion snubber or however the suspension set, so you can feel it load up, and then when you hammer it, it's going to flash. So it's going to be awesome, and good luck this weekend. I can't wait to see it.
You know, to tell you the truth, the first time I ever had a converter made was about the time right around the time I met you, Shane.
Oh, okay.
I had, I just moved to San Diego. I was having problems. I actually ran the car out of Verona quite a few times, and it was 123, 124, 60-foot tires in the air, big time. And then when I ran it up at Fontana, and I went through the traps. 1,000 RPM, I had to shut it off. Or 1,000 foot mark, I had to shut it off. Right, because it hit the rev limiter at 7,500, and I'm like, oh my god, I still got 320 feet to go.
Yeah, it's going through it.
Yeah, and so I sat down and did the math based on the mile an hour, the tire size, all that stuff. The converter was slipping at 29%.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
So I called. At the time, Pro Torque was the place. They were the ones making the best converters you could get, right? And I called them guys, and I gave them all the specs, and I got this converter, and it was sloppier than the other one, and I'm like, hold on, this thing ain't right. And I called him, bitched, complained, the whole 9 yards. I'll send it back to us. We'll tighten it up. And I'm like, do I want to pull it out? Right? Like, that's a lot of work. Take it out and just send it to him and then put it back
no problem.
in.
Bring it back. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? Let me take it up to Fontana and I'll find out. And what was neat about it was, you know, when you got a converter right, I'd never had a right converter before until I actually had this. All right. I blasted it off, and it was looser than a goose, looser than the other one. And at about 4,500, it just hung there.
That's right.
The car absolutely just freight trained.
That's right, because now it's using that torque.
Right, and it stayed there, but it slowly climbed in high gear. And then I went across the stripe, 6,800, the number I gave them. Right, I didn't want to go anything over 6,800, and that way the motor would last longer.
Yep,
that was the idea, and it worked good. And then from then on, I'm like, I'm sold. You got to have the right converter. That's the magic.
For me, it was Continental. I got one. I have Turbo Action. They were all the way out in Florida, and they were like the Mopar gurus.
Oh yeah,
And
in Jacksonville.
Yeah. And I got one from them, and everyone's probably had great luck. I just didn't have it with them because I had to send it back twice, and I just said I was done. There was actually a company up in LA. They used to make converters for the bus system, but they also had a race section. It was called Continental Converters.
Oh, I remember seeing those guys. They sponsored a bunch of stuff at the out of Verona
Yeah.
and Match Race Madness and all that.
Yeah, so that's what I have in my car still to this day is a Continental converter. And you want to talk about a converter being absolutely perfect? That one is. It's got less than 5% slip on it, and it will literally, if I go on the converter on the trans brake, it's 5,500 RPM, right where I wanted it to be. And it, like you said, it goes all the way up to 6,000. It stays right there at $6,000, and then until it catches up, and then it just starts to pull itself on over.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and that was the first time I'd ever had one that was right, and that was the first time any of them had ever done that. And I thought that was so freaking neat. Like it flashed to say like 4,500, but it just hang right there. And the guy says, when I was ordering, he said, "We're gonna send you an 8-inch converter with a billet front face," and I'm like, 8-inch converter? Nah, man, I don't need that small converter. That's never going to work. And he's like, "Trust me, dude, this is why I do this for a living," right?
You're calling me, remember?
Yeah.
Right?
And so I'm like, all right, yeah, I'll go with it. I mean, it's like $1,200 or something, I think back then it was probably $1,000 or $1,200, and today it's got to easily be like $1,800 or $2,000.
Yeah, $2,000. Yeah.
But all right, so Bear Rose says, "Don't tell anyone, but I'm still running the throttle body of my 89 Chevy 1-ton. I just hide it and it never opened the hood." Well, now you just told everyone,
right,
in an open forum. But right. I won't hold it against you, because in my personal opinion, and I know that Tony was a completely anti-EFI, but OBD1 stuff is pretty damn good stuff.
It works.
Especially the TBI stuff. They weren't big. But man, I remember those were the first trucks I ever seen over 300,000 miles was the OBD1 Chevy throttle body fuel injection stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right, mid muscle. Talking to Bear Rose. Let's see here if we got any more questions. Okay, Jonathan Couchy asks, "What do you think about 1.7 rockers with a Comp XE 256H cam in a 318? It's on a 108 LSA instead of 110 though."
Now I'm not familiar with all the camshafts. Just I'm sorry, I don't have them all
He's
in my head.
He's gonna need some lift numbers.
And duration at 50 on the intake and the exhaust, if you could. Anytime you add, better rock arms to a 1.7, it's always going to make it better. It just makes everything more happy to a point, because you're going to be increasing the velocity of the valve opening and closing. So that means in the closing ramp, it's going to be closing much faster. So sometimes as long as you have room for it, I used to tell people to shim the spring as long as you have a clearance for your 50,000s before coil bind. This way you can increase it slightly, because you're going to be moving things a lot faster. So you got to be able to control that bounce at higher RPM.
Yeah. And here's something I learned a long time ago was that, all right. And it was more or less just kind of dumb luck, I guess, when I saw it, because when I was building my cleaver, I was like pretty poor. I was living overseas. It was costing every dime I had just to stay in the place that we lived. And, I was a sailor, so I didn't make a lot of money. The big thing was, I started shopping all these old NASCAR parts that were on eBay, right? They're like takeoff or used NASCAR parts to build my cleaver setup. And I bought a brand new set of pistons from Roush Racing that had never seen any miles, right? And it was like, I want to say $200-300. The set of them pistons were probably like $1,500 or $1,800. I'm sure. But so I got on this big kick. Oh, I'm gonna shop some of his NASCAR parts, and they were throwing parts up there. It was like Jessel rocker arms, 1.85, 1.91 ratio. And I'm like, what in the hell are they doing? Why are they doing that? So I started doing some research on rocker arm ratio, and there used to be an online magazine, kind of like, remember how Bank Shift was? I don't know if anybody even goes to that stuff anymore, because I don't. I just don't have time for it. And but there was an online magazine called Engine Builder. Right?
Yes.
Did you ever read any of that stuff?
Absolutely. I used to get their magazine.
Did you? Okay.
Mhm.
And they were talking about rocker ratios, and this is where it's the most genius thing I ever heard. Okay, so they were putting it all in rocker arm ratio instead of on the camshaft.
Mhm.
All right, and when they did that, they went to a small base circle cam that was a billet cut. Right, that was a billet piece, so it had no flex.
Yep.
You put it all on rocker ratio, and then the lift on the cam would be like a quarter inch.
That's
Right,
right. So you're not moving as much moving parts and changing the direction.
right? And the other thing was the rotating mass of the camshaft after you add up all 16 lobes, right? You've dropped it
Mhm.
by 2.5 pounds, right?
Yep.
And it's like, holy crap, the rotating mass is less, so which would in turn be less friction.
Mhm.
Um, and then put it all on rocker arm ratio. The only downside of rocker arm ratio is the higher the ratio that you go, the more stress it puts on that rocker assembly up top.
That's right.
Okay. And if you're still running like studs and you're not at a big stud by the time you get to 1.7 or greater, you're going to
You're
start
gonna
having problems.
you're gonna break things. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And also too, it's also blowdown on the exhaust. Usually when you start getting into this stuff, you usually see it mostly in boosted applications or like chemically, boosted applications like nitrous or something. They're going to break rock arm ratios on the exhaust for that exact reason, because it's opening against cylinder pressure and spring pressure and with the valve. I mean, the valve going against the
The
actual.
inertia. Yeah.
Yeah, no, just the opening the valve blow down essentially, because all that cylinder pressure is
Oh,
inside there still.
right. Well,
You know.
and that's one thing people don't understand or take into account. Okay. So on that little, let's say you got an 8 millimeter or 7 millimeter race stem on your
Mhm.
valve. Okay. And this is where lash caps would come into play. You put a lash cap on there
Mhm.
that's actually bigger, so it gives it more surface area for that rocker to ride on.
Correct.
But even if you didn't have the lash cap, 7 millimeter stem, if you have that, let's say your exhaust valve is just 1 inch, okay? And if you have 300 pounds of cylinder pressure on the other side of that 1 inch valve, that's 300 pounds it takes to open that valve, okay? Now, your cylinder pressure, let's say it's not 300 pounds, because that's what it would be with just kind of like cranking compression on a race engine, right?
Yeah.
So you're looking at like under load. This thing is, while it's running, you're trying to open that valve. And now you're talking 1200 psi, right? That's pounds per square inch. And the reason why I gave you a 1 inch valve is because there'd be 1200 pounds on the other side of that valve head. Okay. Now, if you looked at it like this, 1200 pounds, and you had a 1.6, you're looking at almost 1200 pounds or 2400 pounds or so. I mean, it would take a 2 inch exhaust valve to do 2400 pounds, right?
Mhm.
But that's the kind of abuse that thing is seeing, and it's seeing repetitively, immediately, like in seconds, right?
Yeah.
Well, fractions of a second as it's being opened and closed. And it's just hammering the crap out of it. And it's all going through that little 7 inch or 7 millimeter stem.
Yeah.
So that's why it breaks stuff.
Yeah, I tell people pounds per square inch, it means get your square inch of the valve. So, your pi r squared of whatever the diameter is, or obviously it's radius at that point. But whatever it is, just take in half, square it, then times it by pi, and that's your square inches. And then whatever the cylinder pressure is on the other side of it, that's what's going to take. So add that into the equation. That's what your push rod, rock arm, and everything's going to see.
Well, and see, I ran into this, and I never even thought of it until you and I were actually talking about this, about rocker ratio stuff. And I saw it in the Navy on a ship. We have a scuttle that is like your round opening that you got to go through, and every
Mhm.
opening on a ship generally has to be watertight, right? So that
Mhm.
generally means airtight, okay?
Yep.
And that's how they test it, because they don't want to flood the space to make sure it works. They pressurize the space with air. And that little scuttle was, like I said, let's say it's a 36-inch scuttle. So it's a 36 inches in diameter, right?
Mhm.
It opened downward in toward the space, and
Mhm.
it's pressurized with water in that space. In that instance, it was pressurized with water at 36 psi. So it's 36 psi times your 36-inch opening, right? So that's your 36-inch scuttle. You take 36 times pi, and that gives
Yeah.
you the square, or essentially this, what is it, the square inches of the
Surface area. Yeah.
yes, the surface area of that
Mhm.
scuttle. And it was like 14,000 pounds of pressure to open that thing with 36 psi on the other side.
Yeah, you can't do it.
Yeah, and people kept saying, "Oh, I think it's, we don't want to open that because you can flood the space." No, you can't flood it. You can't physically open that with a hydraulic press.
That's right.
I mean, it would essentially cave in.
Yeah, and that's just to get it off the seat, and then it's as water blows by it, it's going to get progressively less.
Worse.
It's actually going to get less because you're going to bleed down, but it's still going to be, even once you get it going, it's still going to be like 1,000 pounds. It's going to rapidly go down, but still, you're going to have to continuously push that thing all the way back, and then eventually it's going to want to come back when you let it go.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. But people just don't understand that surface area. And when you're looking at your 1.6 inch diameter valve, take that times 3.14, like Shane was saying, and that's what your pressure is to actually move that valve.
That's right.
To open it up. Nuts. I mean, it's serious numbers. And then when you're talking at a ratio, like pro stockers run up to what, 2.1, 2.2 rocker ratio.
That's right.
Okay. So when you're looking at a ratio like that, the number that it's taking to open that valve on the opposite side of that fulcrum is whatever the ratio is.
That's
so
right.
Let's say it's a 2-to-1. If it was 4,000 pounds to open it, it's 8,000 on the other side. So your push rod has to endure 8,000 pounds worth of stress in a fraction of a second.
Exactly. Nanoseconds. Oh, John Couchy put
this one here.
Yep. So it's 212, 218 with the 10 on a 1.5. So 450 each. Okay, it's 32 at 1.5. Okay, so because the numbers are so small, don't get so hung up on the actual LSA of being 108 or 110. I always try to tell people it's about the overlap triangle. I personally run a 218, and it's on a 106 for my Slant 6 because I want a little bit of overlap to help unfill the cylinder when it's going down the road. But with this kind of numbers, a 108 is going to be just fine. And it's not your 1.7 rocker arm ratio is not going to change anything really, as far as it's just going to make it more lift. It's going to change the duration at 50 instead of like 212. It's literally like maybe one number. I think it's 1.5 at that. So you'll make the cam slightly bigger, but what you're going to do at 50, you're not really going to change much. It's really in the mid lift numbers where you're actually at half lift because it's opening so much more drastically there. And on the backside of the intake is really where you're going to get the biggest numbers because that's on the cylinder fill. That's where you're getting the ram air effect. And that's where you're going to notice the big numbers on this is actually on the cylinder fill on the intake valve side closing because that's when you're filling the cylinder. So it will make more power. I guarantee you that. Will it make the cam much bigger? It'll make it slightly bigger. Where you're going to notice it more is in the lift. And make sure that you're not lifting it beyond what the cylinder head can flow. Let's just say the cylinder head stops flowing at say at 460 and it starts going the other way. You actually might be able to hurt you probably hurt the engine at that point. I'll actually tell you here. I don't have my regular calculator here, but what I normally do is I take 450, divide that by 1.5, and that'll give me the valve, the cam lift. That's 300. Then I take 300 and I times it by 1.7, so that's going to give you 510. So you're going to change. So you're going to add 60 thousandths of lift. As long as you don't have any retainer to seal clearance problems and your springs can handle it, and obviously it's going to increase some of the over the nose pressure, I say go for it because it can do nothing but just give you more power.
Yeah, more rocker ratio has never equaled anything but more power as long as the valve train can handle it, right?
And the cylinder head can handle it too.
Yeah. All right. So, well, Jonathan Couchy says, fun fact, if you're running an NA only, high protectics work well as long as the rings are gapped right, stiffer pistons.
That's correct.
They're also a tighter cylinder wall clearance, so you actually gain less blow by with that situation, right? Yeah, that's what I always liked about the hybrid tactics.
Yeah, I love the hybrid tactics. When I was just basically street racing, I went straight for them, and they were only like at the time like $150 for 8 pistons and rings. It was like can't go wrong there.
Yeah, well, I was doing the 302 forwards, and that's where they were coming with forged up until 92, and then they were a hybrid tactic after that, but they came with thinner rings in like 93, and so I would always buy like you'd buy like the Ford Explorer or Cobra pistons. They're all the same piston, they're all the same part number. It's just a flat top 302 piston, but it have the 1.5 millimeter rings.
Wow.
And I mean, that was the ticket. If you wanted the extra 20, 30 horsepower you're going to get, because when you're street racing, you try to cobble something together for cheap, but because I mean, let's face it, if the car gets impounded, you wouldn't cry a whole bunch,
Right.
right? Because you might not get it back. And so you don't want to put a whole pile of money in the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I always completely disagreed with like the street outlaw stuff, right? Because it's like, dude, if you got caught in any one of them cars, they're taking your life savings right there. I mean,
yeah, those cars
was not legit to begin with.
Right. Right.
When
they first
first
started,
couple seasons were, I mean, those cars, if like think about it, if Flip got his El Camino stolen, I doubt he would cry, right? I mean, it was just a home built car, but after that, it just went off the rails, and it was like, there's no way these guys are still street racing these cars. No way.
No,
because
they're essentially pro mods that are on the street, regardless of what they say. It's a pro mod.
And we were doing it back in the 90s when San Diego had a bad street racing problem. People were getting killed left and right. And it was the dumbasses. It was the people that were like literally racing in town from stoplight to stoplight downtown San Diego.
Yeah, and, for real.
Yeah, and our group would, we talked about it before. We would be down on the 905 freeway, right? And you just go to that industrial park where it turns from the 905 into the junkyard section. And you go to that industrial park, and we'd be right there. It's probably maybe 2 miles from the border. Maybe, right?
Less than that. Yeah.
What was funny is like, that was the place. Friday night, Saturday night, we were down there every weekend. It was SoCal at its finest in the 90s. Oh my God, man. I loved it. Because I'd get a carne asada burrito and then like a 40 ouncer, and we would just hang out there all night, man, and watch, because there was some serious stuff that would roll in there.
See, for me on Friday nights, we used to go up to Escondido, and we would go race at either like Center City Parkway. We had 3 different racetracks there. And then there was another one that was like off of the 78 by the Wild Animal Park. And those are the 2 places we used to race all the time. So, he's talking about
the couch. He's saying, don't put any boost or nitrous on those hypertectic pistons. Actually, I sprayed the piss out of them things. You just have to gap them right. Was a big one. You just had the big gaps in them. The other thing was run 100 octane or 110 octane fuel in it, and then don't get greedy with the timing, and always leave the tune fat. Always leave the tune fat. You just
make
try
it
to
fat
stay
and
away
happy.
from detonation.
Yeah. And I was just about to say the same thing. I ran up to 250 shot on those things. And they ran,
me too, on a 302.
Yeah, 360. Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
Let's see here. Mid muscle. I almost wanted to sag a set of used NASCAR SB 2.2 heads off of eBay. Day late and $1 short, I guess. I don't know. Those things are the SB2 heads were their own monster. They took their own headers, their own intake manifold, their own rocker arm assembly. I don't know if it would have been worth it or not, because you would have had so much stuff to buy just to make it work. That I don't know if you would have really gained anything off of it, right? I was looking at stuff that was, when I was saying NASCAR, these were NASCAR pieces, but you got to remember, in NASCAR, they ran a cleaver up to like, probably like 2005. They were running a D3, which was essentially a variant of the cleaver, and all it was a revised cylinder head. So if you're building parts for a cleaver, it doesn't matter if it's a 351, 302, whatever. You could buy all those old NASCAR parts and virtually just put the right push rods in or right pistons, and it was a piece of cake. They were all cleavers. So,
in SB2 though, they actually have different heads, and they actually the lobes are in different positions. So it's a pain in the ass. It's a whole different valve train, everything.
Wow. So Devin Bound says, here's some history I thought you might like. In Buick's patent app for an overhead valve engine in 1902, Buick was the first one with the valve and head, right? It shows roller rockers.
There you go.
That would have been freaking engineering marvel in 1902.
I'm really big into those hit and miss engines and like the really big 1-cylinder. I watch that shit on YouTube. I'll watch the engine run for an hour, and a lot of those have roller rockers on them from back in the day. So yeah.
So Danny Boyd saying the Buick 300 works out to 225 as a 6-cylinder. Correct. The very first Buick V6 is the 225. It wasn't until later in 1975 when GM bought the entire tooling back from AMC, which was Jeep at the time. It might have been Kaiser, but they bored it essentially 50 over and used the same piston that they were using in the 350 Buick. And that way they didn't have to spend any extra money. They just bought all those pistons in bulk, probably from like Badger or Seal Power or whoever made them. I don't have no idea, but they just bought them in bulk. And that way they all both had the same bore. They used the same piston. So that's where the 231 was born. So that's a 50 over 225. But that's correct. So the Buick 300 actually has a 3.75 inch bore, just like the original 225 V6.
Go ahead, and we're getting far behind, but there's one I want to go to here.
Which one?
Clayton 811. He actually asked, Shane, what is your take on flipping pistons? Seem controversial. Well, let's look at why they did it first. They made the piston pin in a certain location for one reason: to make it quiet when it was running. That's it. If you're flipping the pistons, what you're really doing is you're changing where the center line of the piston is. What I mean by that is that you're actually going to change the camshaft, because when you move it, you're going to move the piston at a different point. It's hard to, where TDC is essentially. It's not much. You're talking, maybe a degree and a half or something like that. We actually worked it out at work because we were talking about this. I've tried it. I've tried it in a Slant 6. I've tried it in a few other ones. It made it a little noisier when it was running, when you're running stock style pistons. Did it make any more power? It never changed anything for me. It just changed the way the engine sounded. I didn't redegree the camshaft, which you should have done, because once you redegree you'll notice that's going to be slightly different. The center line will change. But for me, I personally have never seen it. So that's just my take on it. And I'm only going by my experience and what we did at work as far as talking about this subject.
And that's one thing that I kind of agree with Tony on this one, where the flipping the piston deal with the factory piston, because like we measured it, some of the Buicks were 80 thousandths off, right? So it actually would work in your favor quite a bit. And that's where, we got into a discussion with, nobody could figure out if it actually made any more power or not. The dyno couldn't measure it. And it's like, well, I wonder, that's where, I've always kind of disagreed with the way dynos work, right? Yeah, they're a great tool. Okay. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they do exactly what they're supposed to do. But, okay. I'll give you, for instance, driving it on the street. You're not always driving it. They always do dyno pulls generally from 2,500 RPM up.
Yeah, it's going to be wide open throttle too. Yes.
Right. And there is not measurable differences on there where you're feeling seat of the pants, where you're feeling the inertia and torque that it makes at part throttle or mid throttle, or how it gets up to wide open throttle. There's a lot of things that are different from regular street driving characteristics. And yeah, maybe the number is always the number. But I'll give you an example that everybody, if you've seen my Buick 300 Breaking the Mule video, that's a 300 Buick, and it probably makes 240 horsepower. Okay. I whack the throttle on that thing, and it's snappy. It revs fast, and it's 240 horse. It's 9-to-1 compression. The numbers that it throws out there are not what you would actually see driving. Driving, you would see that snappiness on the throttle. You would see it rocking the engine stand. There's something to do with the inertia and torque that it builds as the crankshaft starts rotating, and that I think is something that you cannot measure on a dyno, and it's something that's not displayed in the numbers that we looked at. Well, I think what you would call it.
Yeah, what you're noticing, I would say more so, is if you're just let's just take you take an engine and you run it on the dyno with the pistons the way they're supposed to be, and then you do nothing else but just drop the pistons and turn them around. So you take number one, you flip everything around, right? So that way it goes the other direction. The one thing you're going to change is the intake center line, and I believe now I'm going off the top of my head here. I believe it retarded the camshaft slightly by 1 degree or something. So you would notice that. But other than that, I agree with you that it's hard to see on a dyno because the dyno only measures torque and RPM, and then it mathematically kicks out horsepower. So yeah, seat of the pants. When I did it on a Slant 6. I couldn't feel anything, and when I ran the drag strip, the number was the same.
Yeah, and I think that's the drag strip is probably truly the test of the real test, right?
Yes.
And I don't know how you would translate that over to a dyno number. I really don't. But I just think it is one of those tools, and you look at it right now, and it's probably the best one that we have. Eventually, somebody will come up with something different if the internal combustion engine doesn't disappear anytime soon. Which I don't know if it will or not. It's if you look at the headlines, it seems like it's going to be gone tomorrow, which is fine by me. Yeah, get all these freaking lemmings off of the gasoline nipple, and I'll take it all. Right. We'll go back to high test. It don't matter because it don't matter if you pollute or not. There's 18 cars on the road that are run by gasoline. So, so Dakota's time in asked, y'all ever tried a dual quad setup with 2 quadrajets? If find a dual quad intake, I think I'm going to try with 2 750s that were made for 301s or 305s. Think that might work okay. All right. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information here that hopefully will help you out. I have seen a dual quadrajet setup. Actually, Buick made one for the 430 that was only available. Like you couldn't even buy it. It was only in-house for engineering purposes only. And there's actually one of them at the bottom of what's that lake outside San Diego in between LA and San Diego?
Lake Elsinore?
Elsinore. There's one at the bottom of that that was on a boat for testing purposes, and the boat sank out at that lake. And with these dry conditions that California's been having, I've literally been thinking about packing up my burb and go out there and fucking fish for that thing, right? But, yeah, because I mean it's cool. You can't get one anywhere else. And now, Offenhauser makes one for a big block Buick that is a single plane setup. Okay, and when you're asking about dual quadrajets are kind of cool because the primaries are 250 CFM. Okay, so if you had 2 of those, it'd primarily be driving around with 250 CFM, and then the second quadrajet would most likely be a progressive linkage setup because that's how I would do it. So that you had really good driving characteristics, but you would only be at 500 CFM, let's say both of them, before you start getting into those secondaries. Now they're both quadrajets are a vacuum secondary carburetor.
Yeah.
And it will only feed the engine as much air as it can until it actually equalizes 0. It balances to atmosphere pressure outside the carburetor. Okay. So you cannot over carburate with a quadrajet. Every quadrajet made after 1972 is a 800 CFM model. Every quadrajet made before 1972 is technically a 750 CFM. A 301, 305, 350, 454, all of them use the same body of the carburetor, right? So they're all either a 750 or 800 CFM. 301s and 305s didn't come along till later in the smog years, so those would have been 800 CFM carburetors. Now, it would have only fed the motor, let's say it needed 512 CFM. It only fed it that much. But I think, there was a company that actually made for an Oldsmobile a quadrajet intake manifold. Had 4 quadrajets on it.
I saw a picture of that.
Have you? It's pretty. It's mind blowing when you see that thing because it's like they're all sideways on there, right? That's the only way you can get them on there. I cannot see an Oldsmobile needing that much air and fuel. Period. But it was just an interesting thing to see, and I wish you the best. If you can find one, I'll help you get it right. I'll help you tune on it. I'll help you do whatever you need to do because I'd like to see one run too.
Yeah.
Let's see here. What's the next one? Mid muscle SB 2.2 will make big power. Remember, they were on 358 cubic inch engine, making 700 plus on 400 cubic inches. They would put 3,000 pound car eights. That's true. That's exactly how I did my cleaver setup. I bought all the old NASCAR parts, built a 427 cubic inch motor that wasn't limited to 358, and I let her eat. And I was hoping to not make. Yeah, I didn't want to spin it to $9,000 because that's what they were doing with the 358s.
Yep.
But I was trying to spin it at 6,700 and make the same kind of power. So,
yeah, because remember, it's just an air pump.
231 is 50 over. So I'm behind the curve. I'm sure you guys are way ahead of me. This seems like something we've been talking about a while ago. All right, let's see if I can catch up.
John Couchy, 816.
I don't. Well, I'm past that one already.
Oh, okay.
Is that the 1.7 rockers?
No. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'm way behind. Dang. Doug Norton is here. Well, welcome, Doug.
Okay, so he's asking about short and long rods. Now, this comes down to what are you going to do with the engine? Are you going to RPM it, or are you going to stay below 7,000? I prefer a rod to stroke ratio in the 1.48 number. For one reason, it's going to build more torque. It's less prone to detonation. If you're going to drive it on the street, that's way better. Longer rods, obviously, you're going to have less piston speed in the middle. Say from what I think it's 75 degrees to 90 to 75 degrees of rock arm. The rod. I would run the shorter rods. That's just me.
Yeah, I'm a long rod guy. I like the long rods. I do.
Yeah, but you give up stuff with the long rods, and what you're going to give is torque.
You do, but what I was shooting for is, okay, so the ideal, what is it? The ideal rod to stroke ratio is 1.7.
But it depends on what RPM.
Well,
because it's RPM based.
Right. Well, it actually depends upon purpose of the engine. Okay.
That's correct.
So
yes.
If you're going to use it like Shane's saying, if you're trying to lug with it, and you're like, let's say you're building a tow rig motor,
yep.
You want a short rod motor.
Absolutely.
Right? The only problem is what I found with short rod motors is I feel they're more detonation prone. And the reason why that is because the piston speed's so high that it compresses that air and fuel mixture really quickly up at the top of the cylinder. Right. Mm-hmm. And if you're kind of running on the ragged edge, it will push them. Like what I found is, okay, you know how like if you ran 87 and you put it on the ragged edge and it's just a little bit of knock and you can kind of live with that. You're like, okay, I just won't get in it hard, right?
Yeah.
Those short rod motors are so finicky to detonation because the piston speed is so high at top dead center that, let's say you built it, it runs great on 89. You pull in a gas station, you don't have 89. You put 87 in it, you can't drive it. You literally can't drive it. That 2 octane made all the difference in the world to where you can't even part throttle the sucker and it's hammering away. Mm-hmm. And it makes them a lot more sensitive to detonation when it in those regards. And I think that's because of the piston speed. What happens is it's compressing that air fuel mixture so quickly that it actually heats up, right? Mm-hmm. But it is also the magic behind making your torque, right? Mm-hmm. That piston speed is what helps it make that torque. Because when you have that explosion, all the power is contained right here. The closer that you can create that piston speed at the top of the cylinder, the more of that power you're going to take advantage of, right?
Well, what I'm talking about is on the other side is after TDC, that your piston, after top dead center. So your
it goes away quickly.
It fires, so the piston is going to go away from top dead center to the middle stroke. Well, let's call it mid stroke. With a short rod, it's going to have travel. The piston's going to travel distance farther because it's moving away from TDC down faster. Because you're going to be at somewhere right around 10 or 11 degrees before and after the piston's not really going to move anymore. It doesn't matter if it's long rod or short rod; it's going to be right in that area. So when that happens at that point, let's say you're pre-detonating and that flame front is actually brewing and it's getting larger. The piston moving away from TDC is going to move much faster with the shorter rod. So that's the reason why they're less prone to detonation, is because From 11 degrees before, 11 degrees after, both long and short rod are basically, the piston is literally stopped at the top and it's moving
Right.
from one side of the arc to the other. But after that, it moves from that to 90 degrees of stroke. It actually moves farther down the hole, but then it slows down at the bottom.
Right.
Because once you get past that, you've already got the free lunch of moving it.
Now the
So
long
that's
rod
what
is the opposite.
the long rod's
all at the
exactly the
bottom.
opposite. Yeah, that's right. It's at the bottom. So, but if you think about that, that's the exact opposite for the long rod. The long rod's actually going, when it's compressing it, it actually is going to compress because it's from the middle stroke up. It actually has a faster up on that side where the short rod is faster down. The longer rod is faster as far as on the downstroke going to the bottom, and then the piston with the short
from the
rod.
bottom of the cylinder up to the half.
Yeah,
halfway
exactly.
point of the stroke.
Yes,
it's moving quicker, right?
That's correct. Yes,
but then it slowly creeps up on it compared to the short rod at the top of the cylinder.
Yeah, yes and no. Because it's going to reverse. So if the piston's moving down faster with the short rod, it's going to move up faster with the longer rod because that it reverses the two.
From
and that
bottom.
Yes,
Bottom.
From mid stroke up. Yeah. So, and that's the reason why, like when I'm running a street car, I will pick the shorter rod. Also, too, it just comes down to weight and mass, but I'll pick the shorter rod just because it's less prone to detonation. You can be a little bit more liberal with the timing, and that's why Mopars were so sensitive with their timing because they have like 6.6 inch rods in those damn things with 3.75 strokes. But you could RPM to the moon, and they were really low piston speed and a very large piston diameter. Chevrolets, you could really, just time those things to the moon, 38 degrees, and you would sometimes 40 on those because they had such short rods. And same with the 302s, it's such short rods that they would get away from the TDC much faster. It was less prone to detonation because of that.
Huh. Well, all right. So we'll move on to the next question I see here. Okay. I see my thinking on the ones for small cubic inches was the idle pickup tubes. I think that's not much of a question. It's actually Dakota's just justifying what he said. Okay. Let's see. Hey guys, my max wedge cross ram was bored out bigger on the secondaries. Someone must have tried a spread bore or quadjet. That would have been kind of cool on a cross ram. Yeah, because it would have had really good low speed torque. If you had like that small 250 CFM on a thermal quad or a quadrojet. All right.
I'll go to the next one.
Which one was that?
Right below that one, Iceman, Mark Kimball.
2K10. Okay. Mark Kimball talked about the friction increasing by the power of 2 to 3 when you get the thrust of a short rod motor. So I can see keeping the revs lower would be good for short rods.
Absolutely. Yes. And that is true. It's usually
they side load really bad, right?
What's that?
When you have the short rod, they side load really bad.
Absolutely. It's 100% true. And in fact, there is really no number, but just a rule of thumb, 7 to 7,500, that's your number. Most street cars are going to be under that 6,500, 7,000 RPM, type of deal. Once you get over that, you really got to be careful. I always say 7,000 is kind of your magic number especially with valve train, short rods, long rods, then you got to worry about piston speed, so on and so forth. It becomes every time you make another step to 75, then to 8,000, 8,500, all that stuff becomes critical.
Well, and that's where the entire engineering of the whole engine starts to become a factor, right? Anything above like 6,000 RPM, and you really need to start looking at the whole entire architecture of the engine.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Jonathan Couchy says, when porting a small block or big block Mopar, port shape is extremely important with stock style heads because you literally can't get enough push rod pinch area stock style heads. Oh, he's talking about the port size.
Yes.
The pinch area and the push rod pinch area is what's causing the limitation on port size.
Yeah. We kind of have a running joke at our work that a big block Mopar is essentially a small block Chevrolet head. Essentially. It's not really designed for, a big block. You get some real head flow on a Mopar big block. They'll make what a big block Chevrolet does, because the big block Chevrolet's got the head is the architecture. That's what makes it. It allows it to flow in and flow out. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It's a Chevy over a Mopar or whatever. They're air pumps. You got to get the air in and get the air out. But why a big block Mopar was so much better on the street is because it had high velocity in the ports, and it makes torque, and torque is what gets you off the line. And most drag races on the street are much shorter than a quarter mile. They're barely an eighth mile, maybe just beyond that. So, and that's the reason why a lot of the Mopars would rule that area, is because of that reason.
That's the exact same reason that the Buicks ran, was because it wasn't the horsepower number. It was the torque number. And when you jump in the car and it's making 500, and here's the misnomer, the 455, the torque king, the king of torque, right? The 510 foot-pounds. That was only 10 foot-pounds more than a 440 Dodge, right? So,
yeah, right.
And it's like, they make good torque, and that's the thing about those wedge heads with the ports similar in that design. They make good torque. I mean, the Buick was a pent roof design. The Mopar, I don't think is a pent roof design. I think it's a wedge. It's a true wedge.
Yeah, it's true wedge.
But they do make good torque, and on the street, torque's king, right?
Torque's king.
Literally, if you want to know the truth, horsepower is just a mathematical figure of your torque.
One's an independent and one's a dependent variable. Sorry.
All right. So, man, we're way behind now.
Yeah.
Okay, let's scroll up and catch up.
Sure.
Okay. Why did AMC or Jeep go from 225 4.2 to the 4.0? Well, that's a good question.
I can't tell you 100%, but I can tell you that the 4.0, they ran for a certain amount of years, and then when they bought by Chrysler, it was still a 4.0, but the cam and everything else was different. So I really don't know why they did that, but I can tell you that some of the 4.0s that were AMC and 4.0s that were the Chrysler are different. Who knows?
I think I can probably throw a little light on it. I'm not 100% positive, okay, but so that 4-liter shares a lot of architecture with that 258, that 4.2.
Oh, that could be it. Yeah.
You threw me off my train of thought. Okay, so Jeep around 1975, okay, they sold the tooling for that 230, which was the V6 Buick, the 225. If you go look at the Jeep stuff, it was Dauntless 225. They came out with their own 6-cylinder version, which was probably your 258. I don't even know. I'm just throwing that out there. But the bore size on it was the same. The Jeep 6-cylinder and the Buick V6 was the same bore size, 3.75-inch bore, right? When they went to that 4-liter, I believe that 4-liter is a bigger bore. I think it's like a 3.4-inch, and I think they pulled some stroke out just to keep it like a fuel-friendly, okay? Because if you've ever driven like a 300 Ford is a robust engine. It's an inline 6. It's 300 cubic inch 6-cylinder, right? It's got a big 4-inch bore and a 4-inch stroke, and it makes good torque for being an inline 6. But you'll never hear anybody say my inline 6 300 was a freaking gas miser, right? Because it was not.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's what you start getting away from, is the architecture of it being a fuel economy type engine. And I think they went to a bigger bore, but they decreased the stroke because they didn't want to sacrifice the fuel economy.
Yeah, because I just Googled it, and it's 3.88 bore on the 4-liter and 3.44 inches. So basically just got to figure out what engine AMC sold that was 388 bore, and that's probably why they did that.
And it probably just shared some pistons or shared a rod or bearings. I don't know. Because you got to look at it on a mass production standpoint. The more things they can buy in bulk, the cheaper it gets. And that's literally why the Buick 300 and 225, they use the same rod and piston and bearings, right? So it was like, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Right.
All right. And so, mass production, they're looking at bottom dollar at the end of the day on how much money they get to take home. They save 12 cents an engine. They save 12 cents an engine, and you just got to live with it as the consumer.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, go 2 more down right here where Clayton asked a question.
2 more down. Okay, Clayton. What is the best way to set ignition timing for maximum performance? What I mean is total timing, not the curve or low speed.
Yeah, I can help you with this. Okay. There was a guy I learned to tune and build engines from, and there's a simple saying: you time for torque and you carburate for horsepower. So what you do is, if you want to, when you're setting timing, you basically find out where the peak torque is at, and all you have to do is just keep going up until you stop building that torque. And then when you'll go 2 more, and if you stop that, back it back down the 2, and then run it through its all the way up to the RPM, and then you start looking at air fuel mixtures. That's how every dyno system really works, is that you just time for torque and you carburate for horsepower. So wherever you're finding your max torque at, you can even go to the track. Just look at your 60 foot and your 100. 60 foot's really going to be on the converter, but look at your 100 foot and your 330. That will really tell you how much torque you're building. As soon as you can increase that and just keep going up 2 degrees until you don't see any more increase, then back it back down to the 2 degrees before that, and I'll make it nice and safe.
Yeah, and because if you think about it, just like he's saying, carburate for horsepower. By the time you're making horsepower, when your horsepower takes over at 5250, right?
52, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's where the number, the 2 curves always cross, no matter what curve they got, right? Those 2 always cross there, and that's at that point you should have all of your timing should already be in. So let's say it's total timing 32 degrees. That curve should already have met that, because you're, like you're saying, you're timing it for torque, and then it's all horsepower after that. So that's where you're having your air fuel ratio right and all that stuff is correct, making the horsepower numbers it needs to make.
Yep. So,
and timing is no longer a factor. Okay. Stroke a 4.2 Jeep with a AMC 4.2 crank. It might be worth it. That may be how they're doing those stroker 4 liters.
Could be.
They're doing them. And Edelbrock makes a head for them. They did. I don't know if they still do.
I had a friend who did one, and he took a stock crank and they just really offset ground it, and they just ran a different rod in it and then raised the pin height. They made a piston and a rod, and then they just offset ground the crankshaft. And that's how they got the we got our very first adult love shots. Oh,
we got porn? Where's the porn? I want to see it. Dang it. All right.
Yeah.
Where is our freaking mods at? What are they doing? No.
He's getting them. He's got them.
Yeah, I'm sure he's all over it. Okay. Let's see here. Barrows. Ford called their inline 6 mileage makers. LOL Chevy called theirs thrift masters, but they did worse than most of the small block V8s. Yes. That was the thing about those 6 cylinders, is in a car, if you had the car-based 6-cylinder, like 240 cubes, they were actually pretty good. When you got up to the big truck ones, fuel economy was kind of out the window. I guess compared to a tall deck 413 Dodge, they probably did okay,
right.
But in a regular truck. I remember when those 306s were available, and like you remember like those 90s Ford trucks you could get with a stick shift, and guys would go in and buy them, and they get like that. I'm going to get a 306 and I'll get 20 something miles of the gallon going back and forth. They still got the same mileage as a 302 or 351 Windsor.
Yeah, because they're always in it. They're having to you put more fuel into it all the time.
Yeah, and I never figured that out, but it had to do with Bourne stroke combos. The only thing I could come up with, because I mean the thing was making good torque, but it was just had something to do with the cubic inch of those. All right, so Bear Rose says horsepower sells cars, torque wins races. That is 100% true.
Right.
Let's see, Colin Tail. Now I care about, but how bad is a 323 rear gear for strip racing?
How much does your car weigh? That's really what it comes down to, because all you're trying to multiply the amount of torque you're going to make. And if you have a super light car, 323 gear is going to be totally fine.
And it depends what kind of racing you're doing. If you're trying to do heads up racing, you're probably going home quick.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're doing bracket racing, it does not, 0 F's given for a 323 gear.
Because you're putting a number on the side of the car. Who cares?
It actually is probably going to be more consistent with that 323 gear.
Yeah, because you'll be loading it much more. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. But and now Doug Narden says Fresca mixes well with Crown Royal. Squirt too.
Sure.
That's good to know.
I just like Crown Royal straight. I mean, why mess it up?
Do you? See, I can't do any of that hard stuff. I'm telling you, man. If I did that stuff, I would probably be like doing this live show from, hey, live from Rutherford County Jail. Right? I mean, it's
funny.
all right. Let's see here. Oh, Scout 80 Scout Diesel. Those are so rare. I've seen the 4-cylinder ones, and
Yeah.
it would not go over 50 miles an hour. Right?
Wow.
It must have had 488 gears in it or something.
Wow.
But I haven't seen the diesels. All right. Let's see. We're done with all the porn. Travis Manic Garage. What is up, buddy? All right. So what is better, over square engine or under square?
Oh, we're going to get into it now because there's a lot of debate on this one. I'm going to say I personally like a big piston and a short stroke. That is what I like.
Over square.
Yes, that I'm over square. Yeah, I should have said it like that. Yes, I like over square.
I have to tend to agree with that. I've screwed with the Buick 350, which is an under square motor, and Shane does too. It's a slant sixes. Under square is great for fuel economy and daily driving.
For what it does, it's just the workhorse. That's what it does.
And but racing application, no, it's so freaking hard. The bore is generally small. The stroke is too much. I don't know. I think that it loses.
Can I interject in here real quick?
Sure.
We were talking about pounds per square inch and surface area. When you have an over square engine, you have more surface area. So when you create an X amount of pounds per square inch, it is able to transfer more of that across the top of the piston because you're only going to get 20 degrees of actual movement or whatever it is as far as explosion. Then it's expanding at that point, but you're really only going to create so much.
Right.
When you have an over square, you're basically spreading that load across the piston a lot greater, and you're going to be able to transfer more of the energy to the piston.
Well, and it lasts longer, right? So
yes.
You're looking at they're great for fuel economy. They're great for towing. They're great for, just like you said, the workhorse, right? If you're wanting to have a generator and lug it down, have an under square engine, right? I mean, like if you're going to be lugging it all the time, under square is where it's at. If you look, most diesels under square most of the time, right?
Yep.
Horsepower engines generally over square.
Yeah.
So let's see. Oh, the wife got him.
Oh, perfect. He's saying, John Wilburn was saying the chat saw it disappear in YouTube, but you don't see it in StreamYard. That's why I told.
Oh,
I told you.
Gotcha.
Okay.
That's why I was saying he was going to get him.
Okay.
See here, Danny Boyd says my Ford 240 does okay, and that's one of those engines that was essentially designed for a car, right? And they're actually really good on fuel. They're not bad, and that was, I believe, like Mustangs came with that, right? And Falcons and stuff came with 240, and I think you could get it even in like a Galaxy. Well, maybe not a Galaxy, but Fairlane, you could get it in a Fairlane. Okay, let's see, Watzonda 2B. On a tangent here, is the trap speed in the quarter mile the average of the final 60 feet? I seem to remember hearing this.
It's basically just cutting the light at the one and then cutting the light at the end, and it measures the time between those two, and that's what gives you
speed. It's time. It's speed over distance, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So time over distance.
Yeah. So there's really no. I wouldn't call it an average. Basically, it's just a time. It's a number, and they use that number for the 60 feet of distance, and that gives you your speed.
Right. Well, and that's in the Navy, we call it time, speed, distance, right? So if you know the distance and the time, you know the speed.
That's right.
Right. So that it's just a mathematical equation, but it is not an average.
No.
Let's see. Jonathan Kashi says, I want to build a 306 two-wheel drive with a 5-speed manual. About 4 years ago, I was really on this kick with the 306. I wanted to do a 306 in my Ford truck, which is a 5-speed manual, but I wanted to put a single turbo on it, right? Because the EFI ones were like, they had the really long runners with the big plenum, and I thought, man, that would be the ticket. And then I started seeing the fuel economy is the same as like a 302 or 351 Windsor. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. There's no real gain there. You might have some good torque from that. And it does have the extra main bearing, right? Because generally they go from 5 main bearings to 6 or 4 main bearings to 5 or whatever it is. I can't remember off the top of my head. But they generally have one more main bearing. It may be actually 2. But those 300s, so about, I guess 6 years ago, I tried to build a stroker D-board 351 Windsor. And I took it to a shop in San Diego, and I did, let's see, I used Ford pistons, like 231 V6 pistons, and I used a 306 industrial truck rod, and then I was going to offset grind the crank on a 351 Windsor crank, and then take the journal down to the smaller 2-inch or whatever it is for a 302. Let's say let's say it's a 2.2 inch or something rod journal. I was going to take it down to like 2 inch or whatever it was. It was a smaller journal, and it just became financially unfeasible because the block itself required 8 custom sleeves to do it. Right. And it was like, oh wow, you can't just pull something off the shelf. And I mean, I figured it was a 4-inch bore. He said, yeah, but we got to go, I can't remember what he said, 45 over to just get past the bad bore, and then go from there to sleeve it. It's like, oh crap, okay, well I need a better block is what you're telling me. He said, yeah, if you really want to do this project, the easy way to do it is just go buy a Boss Ford block that hasn't been bored. It's just got a rough bore, and then bore that and sleeve that, and then we could do it. But it would still cost about the same amount of money, $2,000 in a block, right? Yeah. So that is, pass.
I like that pass. Yeah, I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah, not at all. I really wanted to because I thought it'd be kind of neat. Because you remember in the late 70s, early 80s when Ford did the 225 Windsor. It's not talked about much. Mm-hmm. That was the same kind of thing. Was a D-board 302 Ford. Yeah. NSB Custom Cars, Dallas. Club 96 is not a fun place to visit. So I've heard. Am I too far behind again?
We're getting there because we're getting close.
Club 96 is he talking about jail? When I was saying that I drink too much and I'd be in Rutherford County Jail?
Could be.
I don't know. He's going to have to explain that one to me. All right. So Jonathan Couchy. Shane likes an Oldsmobile 403 then. 4.351 inch bore and a stroke of 3.3 inches. You put some nasty heads on them. The problem with the 403, I love the 403. It's a great, it falls right there in the same category as a Mopar 400, as the Ford 400 modified. They were the engines that everybody overlooked until someone figured them out.
That's right.
It's literally a 383 with a bigger bore, right?
That's correct.
403 was the same thing, except Oldsmobile took a page out of the playbook from Buick in the 70s and made a super duper lightweight block. And they put the mains on those things where they're literally, you can look through the main webbing.
Yeah.
They're so flimsy. Now, supposedly there's some diesel Oldsmobile 350 blocks that will handle that 4351 bore.
Wow.
But, man, they'd be few and far between, I'm sure of it. Let's see.
Yeah, the problem with that Oldsmobile while you're looking for one is just cylinder head. There's just no cylinder head on the damn thing.
Well, the neat thing about those is you can put a big block head on a small block. You can take a 330 and put one of the C heads from a big block on it, probably. I don't know. I don't know if the bore is big enough on that to accept those big valves, but let's see here. Oh, okay. So Danny Boyd saying the 240s went into full-size cars only. 300 was never in a car, trucks only.
Makes
okay.
sense.
Yeah. And I remember seeing those 240s. They actually did really good on gas. The Chevrolet had what was theirs, 236 or whatever it was. I don't know. They did one that was a inline six that was small cubic inch for the cars. I had one in a Biscayne, and the Biscayne ended up breaking the frame in half, doing dry hops and burnouts with it. But because it was the first stick car I ever actually owned. It was an inline six with a 3 on the tree, and it was just abused.
Yeah.
So, but it didn't do bad on gas, and that 6-cylinder was still running when I got rid of it. Let's see. Yeah, see, Fab Race Mod repeats saying over square is better for making power. For sure.
Absolutely. 100%.
But I just give it to those guys that can make the undersquare stuff run. That's like Slant 6 guy. I'm telling you, the Slanted Nationals, if you guys are even remotely just like engines, there's some neat stuff there, man.
Right.
God, I mean, I wish it would have been bigger, and I wish we could have put it on bigger this year. But
just didn't happen. It was one of those things. It was just too many variables that hit against it. You know what I mean?
Oh, dude, we had 100% chance of rain that weekend on that day, right? And everybody was like, "Oh, I'm not gonna go." And then, like, man, yeah, it rained that day at 2 a.m, and by 8 we were racing.
That's right. Talking about the oversquare and undersquare, there actually is one engine that I know very well. It's the H22 at Honda. That is an undersquare engine. Its cylinder bore is 87 millimeter and its stroke is 90.7 millimeter. So coming out in the inches, that's 3.43 for the bore and 3.57 for the stroke. And those were in the this is a Honda S2000. So it was, I mean, now it's a high revving engine, but it was considered the big block Honda, but that was an undersquare engine that they made work very well. So as far as I know, that's
and that one probably was multi-valve, right?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yes.
And see, that's where you take those small bore engines and you throw multi-valves in there and it changes the game. Right?
That's right. Yeah. Because you can actually,
how the 5.4 Ford was.
Yeah. You can fill the cylinder,
Yeah. All right. SD asks, what's your opinion on the future of hot rodding with how high-tech new cars are? They work fantastic usually, but good luck working on them at home.
It's going to be a lost generation. We're going to lose a whole generation of people. My kids come out into the garage, and my boy this weekend actually learned how to solder. But unless their parents were into it, they're just not going to be the people that want to be in the garage trying to build hot rods anymore. I just don't see it happening. I really, unfortunately, I see it going away.
I'll give you my take on this. Okay. Mm-hmm. Hot rodding started with old, dilapidated, falling apart cars.
Absolutely.
There will always be old, dilapidated, falling apart cars.
That's correct.
Okay. I don't care if it's a Tesla. I don't care if it's a freaking Honda. I don't care if it's a jetliner, right? A Messerschmitt. Mm-hmm. There's always going to be somebody that's willing to take it to the next level. You're never, ever going to get rid of hot rodding. You're never going to get rid of the American ingenuity and working around the problems. And see, it's infectious because it originally started here in America, and then it bled to the UK and Australia and Canada, and now you got people in Thailand hot rodding 2-stroke dirt bikes, and it's infectious.
That's right.
And what it is the American spirit, kind of as just being identified as the human spirit, right?
I'd agree. Yep.
Yeah. And always trying to improve. And I don't think it's ever going to go away. The facet at which you see and understand hot rodding may change in the means that we achieve that, but it's always going to be there. I mean, think about it. In the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, the big thing was building computers. Okay. Yep. Our guys got into building computers, and bam, what'd you have? You had computers that were overclocked. They had water coolers on them. They had all the regular hot rod stuff applied to a computer.
Yeah.
All right. And that lasted for a few years, and then that fad tapered out, and we went to Hondas and stuff like that with the newer generation. But there's always some type of facet of it happening somewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It'll never go away.
We're about a minute before we go. So before anyone tunes out, I want to say if we didn't catch any questions and you still want to ask a question we didn't get to it, you can always put it to slantdailygarage@yahoo.com. Once again, that's slantdailygarage@yahoo.com.
Hey, did
Actually,
you answer those 2 questions?
I was looking for them. They didn't come in, so I'll just answer them via email. I was actually waiting to see if they came in. So I'm going to answer the questions. But yeah, I usually get to them. In fact, I see one down here, asking me if I've ever modified a 198 Slant. Yes, I have. But what I was trying to do with my car was I was trying to hypermile a Slant 6. I was trying to get as close to 30 miles per gallon as I could and still be able to drive freeway speeds and not be in anyone's way. And that's what I did. The 198 and even the 170 that's a better combination for the cylinder head. But I didn't care about RPM. I was trying to make this all happen below 4,500. So the 225 was actually better for me because that would actually build more torque. And that's what I was really looking for, was a much fatter, longer torque curve and not necessarily the RPM.
Oh, Mexican Spec saying, you're right, Dallas. There will always be falling apart cars, but the new ones won't be able to be repaired without a bunch of wiring and sensors. I disagree. The reason why I say that is this. I can go get my neighbor's Tesla right now. In a matter of a couple of hours, I can have an unteslaed, and I can have a 455 Buick with a carburetor in it, and just by the end of a week. Right.
Right.
It's not that hard. And you guys are getting lost you're getting confused by the mandates and the limitations that the government is setting forth, right? If you just look at it from the regular person's perspective, right? If you needed something and you needed to go down the road, what would you do?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, okay, yeah, I might get in trouble from the government. After they pull me over and I've been driving it for a year and a half,
right?
I might get in trouble. But and that's the good thing about doing this kind of stuff. It's like, I have fun. I mean, here when I moved here, and I know we're going over time, but when I moved here to Tennessee, they had full-on California emissions. Okay, and I had this '85 Suburban, and it didn't have 350 Chevrolet that came in it, the turbo 400 transmission, and it would have been a gooned up 350 Chevy with 8-to-1 compression, 155 horsepower, and let's say 300 foot-pounds of torque. I put a 455 Buick in it, and I used the same type of carburetor, the same type of distributor, turbo 400 transmission, and it got 7 miles of the gallon better. But the second I pulled in at the
referee or the
emission station, they were throwing the book at me.
Yeah.
So the interpretation of emissions is where the shakedown actually begins and happens. And that's where you look at it. They're not doing it for the environment. They're doing it to fill their fucking pocket. So
that's right.
All right.
One more. Let's get to Bear Rose Garage.
Okay. Which one here? Did you see something interesting?
Yep. 9:01 p.m.
This one here?
Yep. I think I am going to do this with the 65 Dart GT. It's a light car and perfect candidate for hypermiling a hot rod. Now, I've done every variation, and for me personally, what worked the best, I've tried a 200 4R. I've tried all the different types, overdrives and whatnot. A Slant 6, at least for me, they build decent torque, 200 foot-pounds. They just don't have enough torque to sacrifice into an overdrive style transmission, at least everything I tried, to get a benefit out of it. What I've noticed the best for me was the 904 tranny with a lockup converter and then the 7 1/4 rear end, because it takes almost nothing to turn that. So, and then just finding the right combination of camshaft to cylinder head flow to carburation to exhaust flow. That's where I spent most of my time. And I've been able to get, I was able to get with the 2-barrel carburetor, I got in the 25 to 27 miles per gallon, and it worked well. But I did sacrifice a little bit of speed for that. I mean, that was about 70 miles an hour because, these things are built like bricks. I really want to do 75 and 80 because that's the speeds, especially out here. It's 85 plus, it seems like out here. So I went to a 4-barrel and I went to the dual Dolter duals, and I picked that back up. But now mileage is right in the 22 to 24 miles per gallon, but I can go freeway speeds. So
Right.
good luck on hypermiling it. But
I think the way to go on and I know we're way over time here, but and I just think this is kind of fun, interesting topic, hypermiling a car. If you really wanted to do this right, the problem with the Slant 6 is it doesn't make enough mid-range torque to make the thing go down the road under a heavy load, right?
That's correct. Yep.
So I think the ideal situation for this would be like, that small cubic inch slant motor, the 178 or whatever it is?
270, 273?
No. It's like a 178 Slant 6. It's like a small.
The 170 Slant 6.
170.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That one with a single turbo on it to build mid-range torque.
Yes.
The problem is if you take a 225 and you throw that turbo on there, a turbo is nothing. Okay. If you have a 225 Slant 6, you have 225 cubes. You throw a turbo on it, a turbo becomes a variable cubic inch engine is what it is, okay? Because it crams more air in there than what the thing actually would normally naturally aspirated draw in. So let's say you put 15 pounds in there, that engine becomes 450 cubic inches if you put 15 pounds of boost in it.
Yep.
But you take that 170 and you add in a turbo, and it's going to have, let's say you do 10 pounds of boost on it. Now it's probably somewhere about 260 cubes, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's got the mid-range torque characteristics of that 170, only modified, only higher.
Yeah,
right.
And a 170 is an over square engine.
Is it?
It's the same bore as they all have the same 3.4 bore. They just share a different stroke. 3.125 in the 170, and it's 4.125 in the 225. So all they did was change the deck height on the 225. It's actually a taller deck, and the 198 is a taller deck also. And then all they did was just change the stroke in all three of them.
So, I think that 170 with a single turbo on it, to where what would happen is your turbo would be adding some boost, but it wouldn't constantly be under boost, especially at cruise.
That's right.
And what it would do is it give you just enough, like if you loaded it just right, it would just put in just enough air to make the cubic inch a little bit bigger to make it meet the needs that that's being demanded on it, but never go above like that 200 cubic inch size. Yeah. Right. And I think that would be the magic, as long as you can get it light enough. Right. And I don't know if did the 170 come as an aluminum block?
I think that was, I think the aluminum block was, the 170, I believe. I mean, I really don't know much about the aluminum blocks. I really know nothing about them. I'll be honest.
I think the best thing to do would be like shave as much weight as possible. And then I would go nuts. I'd Lexan the side windows and the whole 9 yards, right? But
I think the aluminum block was a 225. I actually Googled it, and the Googles are telling me it's an aluminum block 225. So it's a raised deck type deal. So it's a big bore, what's a 3.4 bore and a super long stroke for 125. So that I did not know. I thought it would have been a 170, but because they raced those things in NASCAR for a while.
Oh, well, hey, so this is going to be the last one, and we're out of here. Daddy's Money Garage. Hey, guys, wanted to thank you very much for the tuning advice last week. I got back to basics, set everything up, and the jet is running great.
There you go.
Clutch is finally starting to break in, too. Sweet, man. Don't beat on it. Just get it nice and broke in, and then go hammer down. But, it was great. Tonight's show was pretty good. I really enjoyed it. The time went by super fast.
Yeah, it did.
But, man, building a hypermiler, that's something I really want to. But, God, there is no freaking GM platforms to do it with.
Yeah. Well, run a Camaro, an early Camaro or something, or even an early Nova that's really light.
Nova wagon would have to be it.
Yeah. So I really want to do a wagon because that cuts down the low pressure zone, coming back there. And then you can use the exhaust to fill up that eddy area,
Well, I just look at it like, a wagon is truck capability and practicality.
Yep.
Car gas mileage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a Vega is going to be hard to find these days. It's not a race car.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, folks, we're out of here until next Wednesday. Thanks, Shane, for being the, sound mind in the situation. So, until next Wednesday, we will see you cats later.
And also, too, if I did get to a question, once again, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com. Once again, that's slantdailygarage@yahoo.com. Send it over, and I'll answer your questions.
All right.
All right.
See you next week.
All right. Thanks, guys.